Hello, Mr. Miliband. It's lovely to see you again. If you're ready, I've got a couple of questions prepared.
Right.
So first of all, what to you does a good outcome from COP30 look like?
Look, I think the most important thing is the world keeps moving forward, I hope faster, on the transition to clean energy. And we're here to fight for Britain's national interest, which says we do need to move faster. I think it's really important to say, Simon, that the world has made progress. You know, we've gone from heading for about 4 degrees of global warming 10 or 15 years back to somewhere around 2.5, maybe a bit less. Now, that's not good enough, but it is progress. And I think it's really important to say to your viewers who might be thinking, well, is this process really worth the candle? Absolutely it is, because I don't believe that we would have made the progress we have without this forcing mechanism, frankly. You know, it's a sort of global embarrassment factor, putting world leaders, world governments on the spot, saying, what progress are you making? Now, our message is very much, we want to move faster, because it's in our national interest to do so. And that's what we're urging. Just as one example for your viewers, we've unveiled a statement today on methane emissions. And as you know, methane is really, really polluting. I think it's something like 30 times more polluting than CO2. And we want swift action on methane because it's a way of getting emissions down quickly, if you like, putting on the handbrake on emissions. And we've got actually quite a good agreement now from countries that they will move forward in tackling methane. So that's just one example of what's happening at this COP.
And in the final text, would you support language around the rapid phase out of fossil fuels?
We want to see that transition away from fossil fuels, absolutely. And if you think about what we're doing in the UK, we're not going to issue new licenses to explore new oil and gas fields. We're showing leadership. We want other countries to show leadership. I'll be honest with you, it's one of the hardest things at COP. Because if you're a fossil fuel producer, you're saying, well, hang on a minute, we're not so sure about this. And so there are a lot of countries that are quite doubtful about this, and it's part of the hard negotiations. But we do need, the Brazilians have got this interesting idea, which is a roadmap for the transition away from fossil fuels. And I think that might have potential, because then countries can get together and think, well, how do we move forward? There's a wider point I'd like to make here, which is, you know, these things are hard, and in a way people can be frustrated there isn't more progress, but in a way it's not surprising. You've got 197 countries that are trying to navigate their way through changing the way their economies work. And that's what this process is all about. So on the transition away from fossil fuels, definitely we want that part of the final agreement.
And is it a step too far to call for a reduction in explicit subsidies for fossil fuels, or is that something that's also on the table?
Look, I think we do need to be looking at the inefficient subsidies for fossil fuels, and I think that's something that we all need to work on as countries. Now, the truth is there's different countries have different definitions of what subsidies mean, but I think that is one of the issues. I think one of the things that's interesting is, for lots of countries now, new renewables are cheaper than new fossil fuels. That's one of the things that makes me optimistic. If you just take this one fact, 10 years ago, I was at an event this morning with the International Energy Agency, and the head of it, Fatih Birol, said this. 10 years ago, we saw about the same amount invested globally in clean energy as in fossil fuels. Now it's 2-to-1 in favor of clean energy. Now, the reason countries are doing that, partly because they care about climate, but also because it's in their economic interests. With solar, wind are now frankly cheaper than fossil fuels. I think it's another reason to feel a sense of positivity about what's possible.
So continuing sort of on the financial theme, we're coming to the end of the 3rd International Climate Finance round for the UK. Are you going to be using COP to announce the 4th ICF target?
That's going to come after COP and after our budget at the end of November. And we're obviously working through what our overseas development budget means for so-called ICF4. I mean, we're proud of what we've done in ICF3, 11.6 billion of contributions, and it's in our national interest to do this, working with other countries. For example, on deforestation, countering deforestation, we've seen over £1 billion to counter deforestation as part of ICF3, but ICF4, that will come later, but we do take our responsibilities seriously. And just to say to your viewers, who I suspect probably will be persuaded of this, it's in our interest, it's in our national interest to do this, because this transition only works if all countries are part of it. And we're trying to persuade poorer countries to be part of this transition and also helping them to adapt to climate change. And that's the point of our ICF budget.
And as part of that budget, which obviously we won't see for a little bit, a lot of NGOs like the WWF and the Nature Conservancy are calling for a third of ICF4 to be explicitly around nature-based solutions and protecting nature. Is that something that you can commit to? Is that something that the government's considering?
Well, we'll look at the precise proportions in due course, but absolutely nature-based solutions are a crucial part of our ICF. In a sense, though, you've got to be guided a bit by, or a lot, by developing countries and where they see the priority. The call I hear a lot at this COP, and I think it's going to be part of the negotiation of the next 2 weeks, is money for adaptation. If there's one area where developing countries feel they are underfunded, in particular, I mean, they feel across the board, but in particular around adaptation to climate change. And it's not surprising, really, when you see things like Hurricane Melissa, which obviously hit Jamaica really hard. Countries really feel the need for adaptation funding. And this is often something that is harder to get hold of because it tends not to work through loans. You need to have grants. And so that's, nature-based solutions, adaptation, they're a big focus of the next round of ICF.
And as part of that adaptation focus, which I agree has been underserved so far, is the government considering anything around direct cash transfers, or are you sort of still sticking with more traditional funding mechanisms?
Look, we look at a range of funding mechanisms, both bilateral help through international institutions. Again, my take on this, and we had a lot of discussion about this last year's COP, around the so-called NCQG, which is the new collective quantified goal, which was 300 billion set for 2035. My sense of this is one of the biggest complaints of developing countries was the money just not flowing. So money being allocated but not actually getting out of the door. And so the so-called quality of finance, as well as things like adaptation, are really, really important. And this is one of the things that my team is engaged on, working on making sure that money flows. Of course, it's got to be well spent, but that the money doesn't just get held up for year after year. That's another big priority for us.
And a specific project that we've heard a lot about at this COP is the Tropical Forest Forever facility. We heard yesterday the UK isn't going to be putting taxpayer funds into it. When I spoke to the PM, he said his word was that we were going to be supporting the fund. Could you clarify what support means in this context? And was the decision to not dedicate taxpayer funds because of budgetary constraints, or was it because you were dissatisfied with how the facility fund was being structured?
It's a really important question. We've worked with the Brazilians for a couple of years on the TEFF, as it is known. We've helped design the TEFF. At the moment, what we're committing to is working with the World Bank, that is the administrator of the fund, working with the City of London to get private finance flowing. We haven't committed money at this stage, and given the budget that's coming up and the fiscal backdrop, you can understand some of the reasons for that. But it's certainly not to do with an unhappiness about the fund. We think the fund is a really great innovation. Indeed, it was nominated for Prince William's Earthshot Prize. And so it's something we're going to keep under review about whether we could make a public contribution in the future.
So we also saw reporting yesterday from Reuters that the UK was considering a fund specifically around the Congo rainforest. Do you have any more details that you can give us around that?
Yeah, so we're big supporters of the Congo Basin Fund. And it's something that we had signed up to in the past, and we've reaffirmed our commitment to it as part of our international spending. That's an ongoing commitment, and it's a sign. I think I said earlier that if you look overall at the most recent ICF round, it's something approaching £1.5 billion for nature-based solutions for forest for countering deforestation. So I think, the Congo Basin is part of it. We're going to look at the TFFF in the future. And what's the reason for this? The reason for this is that frankly, the people who depend on the forest and for whom deforestation is a total disaster, the indigenous people, but also because we know that it's an absolutely crucial way through carbon sinks that we actually tackle the climate crisis. So we're really, really committed to this agenda.
And sort of as a final follow-on to that, a few weeks ago we saw that the Global Ecosystem Assessment report was due to be released and it was blocked for publication. And the implication in the press was that the government was unhappy with the answers it could give to questions around how it was preventing habitat loss. Do you think the government is doing enough? And if so, why was the report blocked?
I'm not familiar with the details around that report, but more generally what I would say is, look, I don't think any government can say it's doing enough. We've all got to do more, frankly. I'm proud of the UK's leadership on climate. I'm proud that we've got a world-leading nationally determined contribution NDC or target of 81% reductions by 2035. I think that's widely recognised as being aligned with 1.5 degrees. But my message here at COP is we've all got to do more. We've all got to go faster as a world. We've made progress as a world, but it's not nearly enough. And I just want to sort of reassure your viewers, we're here to fight for our national interest. We're here because we think only by engaging with the world, only by working with others, can we make progress. And people shouldn't despair, because the world is making progress. Countries across the world, the vast majority of countries, are really committed on this agenda. And we saw the PM, we saw the Prince of Wales. I think that's a sign of the UK government's commitment and a sign that we are absolutely determined to play our part and to show leadership. And just last thought, British leadership does matter. When we passed the Climate Change Act in 2008, 60 countries followed. When Theresa May put net zero into law in 2019, now 80% of the world's GDP is covered. So Britain can make a difference, and we're determined to do so.
Absolutely. And if I could just ask one final question. We know that the United States aren't sending any senior politicians to COP, but there's certainly fear that they're going to try and influence it in the way that we saw them influence the carbon tax negotiations of the IMO. How do you think parties at COP30 can support one another to try and negate that influence, which presumably will be used to try and water down ambition?
Well, look, my understanding is the US is staying away because they've opted out of the Paris Agreement. Now, that's their decision. My overwhelming sense at this COP is that countries across the world, the vast majority of countries, are determined to carry on acting. They recognize that we're in this together, and only by acting together can we tackle this problem. Now, it's for democratically elected governments, including the US, to make their own decisions. But my overwhelming feeling, having been here for 24 hours or so, is of countries from the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere, developing, being absolutely determined to keep doing this. Because they recognize that the Paris Agreement was a really, really important step forward. They recognize that we've made progress, but they also recognize that time is short, and we've got to speed up, and we've got to act together. And so I think, whatever individual countries decide, the overall sense, the overwhelming sense, is of the vast majority of countries, as I say, being in this together and determined to act together.
Well, I certainly hope that we get a good outcome. I'll say the same thing I said to the Prime Minister, which is that the eyes of everyone in 2100 are watching, and the benefits of getting this right are impossible to overstate. So I wish you luck in the negotiations, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Simon. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Cheers, Ed.
Take care. Bye, bye, bye.